would argue this is the most threatening moment for American interests since the end of the Cold War, because all of these countries before were either poor or they were not working together, and now they're becoming wealthier and they're working together. And it's pretty clear that they want to change the system that the U.S. leads. And Trump is kind of checked out on this, right? I mean, you need greater leadership, right? Trump's got to go back to the eyes. He's got to get along with them. We got to stop doing the tariffs. And we got to sort of stand up and work together. We did this in the 40s and the 50s in the Cold War, right? And we kind of brought together the free world, and we worked together to sort of, hold up the ramparts against the communists. It can be done, but it's going to take someone with more diplomatic savvy than Donald Trump.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I've got Robert Kelly on. He's a professor at Pusan National University in Seoul. We're going to speak all about what is happening on the global stage. And just a reminder that you can watch us every day, Monday through Friday, on Times Radio's YouTube page, or stream us as a podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. Bob, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you for having me.
Let's get into this meeting between Putin and Kim Jong Un. Bob, he basically said that he was willing to help Putin and Russia with anything that they need. Of course, we know that they've given Russia 10 to 12,000 troops to fight in its war against Ukraine. So when we see them commit publicly to helping as much as Putin wants, is it worrying on the world stage?
Yes, because a couple of things. So first of all, we're increasingly concerned about the combat experience that North Korea is gaining in the conflict, right? The North Korean military hasn't actually fought a major conflict in decades. And so we're actually genuinely worried that North Korean soldiers are learning how to fight, for example, on a drone saturated battlefield, which looks like it will be the future. There's that. And of course, we're also worried about what the Russians are giving the North Koreans behind the scenes in exchange for all of this assistance, right? I mean, North Korea is a very transactional place. The North Koreans are not doing this out of ideological alignment. They're getting something back from the Russians, and we know some of that is money, right? We know that the Kims need dollars so they can buy all this stuff that they can't get because of sanctions, booze and flat screen TVs and jet skis and all that, right? But I think what we're more concerned about, what there is a lot of concern about here in South Korea, is that the Russians are giving the North Koreans missile technology. They're giving them telemetric information in order to improve, sort of missile distance and accuracy. They're giving them information about how to build better warheads so that the warheads can survive reentry. When a warhead in space sort of reenters the atmosphere, right, it can burn up, sort of like in the movies and stuff, like the moonshots and stuff. And so the North Koreans need to build better warheads so they can actually survive the rigors of reentry. And the Russians know how to do that. They've had that stuff since the 60s. And so that's the kind of stuff that we're really concerned about. And we just have no window into that at all, for exactly the reasons of paranoia and secrecy that we were just talking about, right? And so this serves North Korean deterrence, right? And they're very afraid of being attacked, right? So if they think we don't know anything, right, and we're terrified of them, that keeps us at bay. I think that's the point of all the secrecy, right? That if we don't know what they have, we assume the worst, and so then we never strike them. We never do to North Korea, for example, what we did to Iran 2 months ago, right? That will never bomb them because they don't know what they have, right? And the Russian alignment makes this even worse because, of course, the Russians have really good nuke and missile technology, and we don't know what they're giving the North Koreans.
When we see Putin and Kim friendly, having meetings, excited to see each other, and then we see Putin and Narendra Modi holding hands, talking about their energy cooperation, talking about their strategic partnership, does it look like any of these people, any of these countries are taking Trump or his threats seriously?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big problem, right? I mean, at this point, Donald Trump has alienated so many of these guys that they're all happy to work together, right? I mean, that India is over there is just bad news. And there's been a lot of focus on that in Western strategic circles, right? That if it looks like Trump gave up India because he wanted Modi to help him get a Nobel Prize, that's going to be seen as just a catastrophic strategic blunder because India is actually really valuable in counterweighing China in Asia. I do think the larger issue that we were talking about before is like an axis of upheaval or something like that. I mean, the more we see these guys together and the more it looks like they're planning and strategizing together, having these side meetings, like you said, with Putin and Kim, the more it looks like an axis and less like a gang or whatever. Right? You and I have talked about this before. I used to argue, maybe like a year ago, there's not really an axis. That sort of implies too much coordination. More like a gang. They all kind of don't like the Americans, but other than that, they don't really do too much together. It looks like it's maturing, actually increasingly in the direction of like we're actually coordinating, right? And that would be pretty frightening, right? Because, I mean, you're talking about the biggest states in Eurasia. And if they're all working together, that's really bad news for Taiwan, Ukraine, most obviously, right? And I think Trump is kind of squandering America's ability to divide them, right? There are a lot of divisions between these states, and we can work those. But, Trump's idea of diplomacy is sort of like saying crazy stuff on Twitter and threatening big Greenland. I mean, none of that stuff, that kind of bluster may play well on media and home in the United States, but it's not, as you pointed out, it's not going to work terribly well, right? We're driving all these countries together, and you see that most obviously with India.
Well, is it looking like a shift in the global balance of power right now, Bob?
Yes, and I think that's exactly what the military parade was designed to do. Right here, all these new missiles we have, here are these cool tanks, here are these new warheads and glide vehicles. All of this is designed, I think, to imply that the Chinese are going to go head-to-head with us, which is to say that they're going to arms race with us, with the Americans directly. It's going to be a point-to-point competition, right? For every aircraft carrier we have, they're going to build one. For every missile we have, they're going to build one. Nobody has done that. There's not been that kind of direct competition against U.S. power since the early 1980s. By the mid-80s, the Soviet economy was falling apart. For 40 years, we kind of got used to the United States being at the top. There were challenges, but they're always kind of weaker, right? It looks like the Chinese are trying to go point to point to be a direct peer competitor to the United States. And I'm sure the Russians and the North Koreans are happy to go along with that, right? Because they obviously see the United States as a big enemy. And so, again, this is the coordination threat.
Well, when we see them all together in this pretty unprecedented event in Beijing, like we've never seen them all together publicly. Now, I wonder, does this give, and of course seeing North Korea commit to Putin, commit to helping Russia with anything. We don't know what went on behind closed doors with Xi Jinping. He's claimed that he's neutral in the situation, but we don't know what he's committed to behind closed doors. But regardless, Bob, do you think this partnership, this strategic partnership, whatever friendship it is, whether it's just as kind of a we hate the USA club, whatever it may be, do you think it's giving Putin more motivation to ignore Trump's calls for a meeting with Zelensky and to keep going with this war?
Yes, and that's exactly where, if Trump really was the diplomat and the dealer that he says he is, that he could use those skills to drive some wedges between his coalition partners, right? The best way to get the Russians to deal with us on Ukraine, besides like a battlefield victory, which most people think is impossible, would be to cut Russia off from those countries which are supporting it, right? North Korea, China, India to a certain extent, right? We know that India sort of bought Russian oil and stuff like that. And so, good diplomacy would be to try to push these countries away, sort of try to strike some deals with them, stop supporting the Russians, so the Russians would have a harder time in Ukraine, right? And of course, this is exactly what Vladimir Putin doesn't want, which is probably why he came to Beijing, and you see him, in all these pictures smiling and shaking Modi's hand. The whole thing is to sort of suggest you're not just fighting Russia and Ukraine, you're fighting this big block of states, all of whom want to revise the international order to have it be less American dominated. And this is where, again, sort of like Trump's ineptitude, for lack of a better word, on diplomacy is really costly, right? Because he just doesn't put in the time and the effort and the reading and the work to really sort of create these splits and divisions. You saw that in Alaska, where the whole thing was kind of thrown together at the last minute. We've seen it with Witkoff, who just is just way out of his depth, right, on a lot of these issues, right? I mean, we got to get in there and work this stuff. You got to be like Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon. You got to pull all the levers and push all the buttons and stuff like that, and like really do that kind of diplomatic work to break up this emerging coalition. And I'm really concerned that Donald Trump is not doing that. Going on Twitter and saying America is unchallengeable, that's not sufficient, right? I mean, you got to get out there, because Trump's alienated our liberal allies. So we can't go to the Europeans and say, let's work together on this because they don't like us, right? Then we got to start talking to these countries directly. We got to start trying to strike deals. And instead, like with India, for example, I mean, that looks like just a catastrophic blunder, right? Trump's desperate for a Nobel Prize, and so he alienated India, who's an obvious ally against China. I mean, that's just a huge error. And so I'm really concerned that Trump is getting in over his head on this stuff, that he won't know how to respond to this axis.
Here's what Mitch McConnell said, Bob. He said, I think this is the most dangerous period since World War II. He's referring to China, North Korea, Russia, Iran, and its proxies as the enemies of the United States. And he said that we are not prepared like we should be. What's your reaction to that? A Republican senator coming out saying the United States is not prepared like it should be.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I definitely, to the extent that they become a real axis and they start to work together, if there's some kind of genuine strategic planning among these four anti-American states, then we're in real trouble, right? I mean, the big issue, of course, is China, because China needs Western market access. So I don't know how openly anti-American the Chinese want to swerve. We know the Russians, the Iranians, and the North Koreans do, right? They certainly reject the U.S.-led order, and they really want China to come with them on that. I think China's kind of mixed on this, which is why, Chinese language on Ukraine this week has been very, very low and sort of quiet, right? Because they don't fully want to commit behind the Russians because they need to sell to the West. But I don't think it's the most dangerous part of history since World War II. I would argue that was the Cuban Missile Crisis or something like that. But it's certainly, I would argue this is the most threatening moment for American interests since the end of the Cold War, because all of these countries before were either poor or they were not working together, and now they're becoming wealthier and they're working together. And it's pretty clear that they want to change the system that the U.S. leads. And Trump is kind of checked out on this, right? I mean, you need greater leadership, right? Trump's got to go back to the eyes. He's got to get along with them. We got to stop doing the tariffs. And we got to sort of stand up and work together. We did this in the 40s and the 50s in the Cold War, right? And we kind of brought together the free world, and we worked together to sort of, hold up the ramparts against the communists. It can be done, but it's going to take someone with more diplomatic savvy than Donald Trump.
Robert Kelly, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you for having me.